Welcome, everybody. This is budget work session 1 of 4. We spread it out to 4 work sessions this year for the fiscal 26-27 budget cycle. We did that to give the council ample time not only to have dialogue with our staff, which we're going to be available throughout the process, but also just to do roughly 2-hour increments. We had been pushing as far as 3 hours, which is a little exhausting for you and the amount of information you're absorbing. We also moved to the council chambers this year to give you a desktop monitor and just to have more room for both the public and the staff. So welcome back to council chambers. We have a lot going on with this budget. It is and continues to be the largest budget in our history, and that is very normal with our growth. As we roll into a few housekeeping items, first and foremost, we are recording but not live streaming. The recordings will be available on the city's website along with materials, the presentations, and anything I've handed you. We will also post on our website, so that's not up and available yet, but it will be once we get the recording caption. We'll post PowerPoints and any document items. As usual, typical housekeeping, the council has access to anything that they need in their conference room, and so feel free to come and go as needed. We will have a scheduled break part of the way through Allison Edge's presentation. Questions are welcome at any time, whatever is your pleasure. Stop us if you have a question in a moment so you don't forget it. And then I'll be asking you a little bit more later on about outside agencies. We've included a little bit of information in your packet about that. I have not printed a large outside agency packet for you yet this year because I want to ask you some questions, and we don't have a scheduled meeting to go over that. So as you gain more information, we can discuss further what your lens is, and we're happy to provide that. I certainly didn't want to cut down 48 trees if you didn't want them cut. So kind of rolling into our agenda for the day. Let's see if this is going to work. Greg's going to have to advance this. Let's see.
Oh, let's maybe try this real
Start that out. You know, Greg wants to talk to you guys as usual. Let's see if this
quick. I have
works.
another one if that's not working. It's not maybe?
Not going.
Okay. Oh, actually the computer is locked up. How about 1 second?
1 second. Talk amongst yourselves. Just kidding. You've got in the PowerPoint as Greg's bringing that back up. Today I'm doing a general overview as I always do. Allison's going to go over government and financial reporting, a general overview. And what that is we're going to talk to you about different fund types and other things. It's not Budget 101, but going over a lot more about what you're going to be looking at. And then she's going to do the broader financial overview of all of our revenue funds and so on and give you guys a better lens. And so then on day 2, just quickly so you can figure out kind of what our whole process is going to be, we're going to go over all of our capital projects and capital outlay, and that'll be on Wednesday. And so we'll get all of that there. It is included in what's in front of you, and I'll go over that in a minute. And then on days 3 and 4, we pop in 2 departmental presentations, just so you know what's happening, and that'll be next week. A good bit of the staff is here today. They're here to help me answer your questions. They're also interested in what you have to say or what questions you may have that we can help with. I'm really proud of the work that everybody in this room does. I couldn't ask for a better team, and so I'm pretty excited about it. Rolling forward, what is our budget process? Well, the people that sit behind me that are on our staff, they know a lot about that, but we'll talk first about budget packet. I didn't put a huge binder in front of you today. You'll get that later this week. This is just the items that we're talking about in the first 2 days so that you could focus on these items, and I'll give you this plus the enormous amount of pages later this week. And so in there, you'll see my budget message be the same published. You'll see the financial overviews, capital outlay, capital projects, and at the very end are the outside agencies. Again, they're proposed to be level funded, but we did have a few agencies ask for more, and Heidi, someone asked for less. A couple agencies asked for less, so you'll see that in the end when we get to it. A little bit about our process. You know, we started a comprehensive budgeting process many years ago, and then some city managers that came before me decided we'd go to a biennial budget process back in 2001 and 2002. We had done that until last year when you indulge in a single year budget so that we could get off cycle with our elections. So we were at mid-biennium because a 2-year budget is a big undertaking, but it actually, so much ramp up that I'm about to talk about goes into it that it is preferable that we do this 2-year budget. Gives us a snapshot. Things with revenue and expenditures are moving rapidly, but nonetheless, we start the whole budget process by our citizen and resident survey that was done in the early to mid-spring. And then we roll around and have some budget kickoff things with our departments so that they know what's going on, and we get our outside agency requests in. And a lot of that happens in April. In May and later May, budgets are due from staff. It takes me the better part of June, and we did it on steroids this year, to meet with we meet with every department about their entire operating budget. We have separate meetings about capital projects. It's quite lengthy, and meetings about personnel items. And then in July, we formulate the budget. Generally speaking, you can see your work session dates on here. We can add more. We can meet again about whatever you want to meet about. This is just the beginning. And then we have the budget ordinance first reading is on September 2nd. Doesn't mean I expect that you have to act on it on that day. That is the introduction of it. And that gives me a lot of runway between the 21st and the 2nd, should we need to adjust something or your comments incorporated. I also want to thank, while our greater staff works very hard on the budget, there's key members of the budget team that are here. Allison Edge, you guys know her very well, is our finance director and treasurer. Heidi Lowry, Heidi's sitting here. You see her periodically, and she's our accounting and financial reporting manager. Stephen Krantz, he was working so hard on the budget, he injured himself. He is overall our budget and strategic planning manager, if I could speak. And then we've got Walt Austin sitting next to him. He's our budget and management analyst. Erica Sprouse, she is our principal accountant, and she's sitting right over here. Poor Latrice got left off the list, but Latrice Mose, she's our revenue manager, and she's revenue guru, and she takes care of all of those things. And then Michelle Wall is our HR business partner. She does all of our payroll. You can wave, Michelle. It's good for you. You don't see Michelle very much. We all love Michelle. She and some people in finance, if they don't do what they do, we don't get paid. And we don't get any benefits, so thank you very much. And then you guys know Alinda Dinar, who's our HR director. So it's a greater team that works on the daily on the budget that I drive very crazy. We're going to roll into some citizens' priorities and our citizens' survey that we also call residents' survey. I had to ask our consulting firm why they changed it, and we went over this a little bit, but they like to call it a residents survey now, so we're going to use that interchangeable, but probably still citizens survey. You saw this information already about what major categories the citizens think should receive the most emphasis: flow and management of traffic, maintenance of city infrastructure. I can stop at that one and say that we as a staff believe that citizens are confusing and or combining the two, that they think that may mean more roads, more intersections, not just maintenance. Sometimes they mean potholes, but sometimes they don't. We'll be looking in 2 years to change some of that language to get a little more deeper into that, because I don't think we're getting quite what we want out of that. I think they're combining the two, which isn't a problem. They're both a priority. And of course, they're very interested in their city school system, quality of parks, police and fire, et cetera. What are we using that for? I'm trying to make sure as we formulate a budget and know what we think, and sometimes what you think and what you're saying is, what do your constituents think, and what are we hearing, and do those two things align? And they pretty much do. So a little bit about, I asked you some succinct questions about these items, and this is how you actually rank them. So traffic flow and improvements was your overall number one priority that coincided with what the citizens had to say. School funding is always up there, and I need a caveat. In your priorities, all of these things are priorities of the city. That's not it. I need to make sure if I'm putting emphasis on funding, that if I'm putting more emphasis on one than the other, or if you guys bring up random things that were not directly on my radar screen, I need to make sure those are being addressed. And then public safety facilities and equipment, industrial development, street maintenance and resurfacing, then commercial, Richland Park, Greenways, and Duck Sanford Park. I've never had a tie before, but they did tie. kind of down there, and industrial development and street maintenance and resurfacing. So that just helps me kind of see what you guys are thinking and make sure that we're there. This next chart just categorizes them in the same way in thirds, just so you can kind of see where they're landing in your priority levels. And one of the things is Allison Hall could be a little offended about some parks things, but she shouldn't be. As I remind her, we've spent a lot of money on parks. We have more to go that I'm going to propose in this budget. What happened is in the early 2000s, we spent a lot on parks, and then we went for many years and did not spend much of anything on parks. And our citizen survey results have shown through and through our citizens are happier with the facilities that we're providing. Yes, ma'am. Oh.
Something's incorrect because those aren't my rankings, and I have 2 5s. So just, we can revisit that, but just letting you know that that's not what I ranked things to be. So.
If that is the case, that is my fault.
No. Just, we can revisit that offline. I'm just letting, because if somebody looks at there and says she put 2 things as 5s and no 1s, and anyway.
Oh, that would be operator error on my fault. So I will fix that.
Yeah, that's great.
So, they are supposed to add up to a number at the bottom, and it must have added, or I must have picked up the wrong thing. So that's not on my staff, that's on me.
Yeah, I just didn't want people in the audience
Okay.
to think I ranked things in a weird way.
Nope, I'll fix that for the next session. That's my fault, and I don't know how I missed that, but obviously it's a typing error on my part. We will go to some traffic flow rankings. I also asked you to look at intersections. And in looking at intersections, I think Councilman Parsons was fair. We'll go over his comment in a bit, like I don't have enough information to fully rank these. However, I wanted to know what you're seeing and hearing from your constituents. What are they saying? What are you seeing? Councilman Griswold pointed out, hey, this intersection has a lot of accidents or what have you. He's right about that, and there are things that we're looking at data. If it's in here, it was likely to be proposed. I wanted to see where you stood. Not all of these are proposed in the 26-27 timeframe. They'll stretch further than that, but I'm trying to figure out where to put emphasis. One that we'll talk about in our CIP presentation Wednesday that is not in here, there's a section of Donahue that is missing, and it is missing intentionally. I cannot widen a road we do not have right-of-way for, and has county property on both sides without right-of-way. And so I dropped it, and we'll talk a lot more about this Wednesday out of the current capital improvement plan, and that's widening Donahue from Sagahatchee Creek up toward the Farmville intersection. It is hard to save money in the budget for an unknown and to keep other projects from happening because we're waiting on something. We are not allowed, we can kindly work with a property owner to acquire right-of-way, but if they do not want to cooperate with us and it is property in the county, the city has no authority to acquire it. The county or the Alabama Department of Transportation would have to step in, or we cannot get right-of-way. And so there are some items we'll go over unusually. Also on Wednesday, a list of projects that we are actively working on that don't enter into the budget anywhere, and that will be because we don't have information yet that is needed for something, or there's unknowns in project timelines and what have you. And I think some of you will wonder, well, what are we all working on? There's a lot of things, but we're also very challenged by there are only X amount of dollars to go around in a given fiscal year. And so as we get into financial projections later, the later we get into the 6-year window of the capital improvement plan, the more things change. So we will, on traffic flow priority rankings, generally speaking, all of you we're pretty well aligned on some aspects of things, but Donahue widening, Shug to Sagahatchee's well contracted already. The Farmville intersection, North Dean and Opelika Road is a critical intersection for us. As again, Scott gets into this on Wednesday, we changed that project from a bigger project that's more of a stage road to Opelika Road situation and not further down, not to Annaloo anymore. We're trying to chunk projects down into smaller pieces to get them delivered. Opelika Road and East University Drive just needs some double turn lanes. North College Street and Drake has been on here for some time. There are some right-of-way issues and utility moving pole issues that haven't enabled us to do that. You'll see a project on Wednesday that's to do the sidewalk in that vicinity and get that going while we're waiting on some other things. You'll see East University Drive widening is in the vicinity of Duck Sanford Park and some other projects going in the area. North Dean Road extension is East University Drive to 280. It's one of the projects that will eventually enter the budget, but I wanted to see kind of how you felt about it. And then Shelton Mill Road and East University Drive is, I think Councilman Adams said there's some issues there at times as well. And then the Outer Loop Road. The Outer Loop Road will enter the budget, but it is a big grant-funded thing and unknown. And one of the tilts I want you to think about as we begin to talk about projects is I'm trying to deliver projects we can deliver. And Councilman Parsons had a nice thing to say, like, let's go on the Outer Loop. However, we keep working on the Outer Loop, and it is a lot of money. And we need grant help. And so I want to get focused on the intersections we can fix and not wait. I don't want to take room in the budget for projects that are bigger fiscal challenges for us while we've got other intersections that are also having issues. So we're really trying to balance out some needs, and those will come later.
Megan, I know we're going to get into this more on Wednesday, but with this list being a list that we want to accomplish all of these, right? And knowing that we've got financial restrictions, I think it's also fair to say that our bench of contractors is not the deepest. Good ones, but not a lot of them. In a perfect world, how long would it take to get all these projects done? If you were going to say we're going to knock them all out.
It's not a question I could answer directly for you because at the moment, some of them, they're in a multi-year fiscal status, and some of them, like the Moore's Mill widening, I'm checking your temperature on it. That's much later in the CIP than some of these that are more immediate. But if you can hold that a little bit till Wednesday's discussion, it's a good one. One of our challenges as we get into our fund balance discussions and so on is it is hard for us to get projects done, and that frustrates you, it frustrates the staff. I have a lot of my key staff members in the room today that handle our capital projects, and we're really trying to reset your expectations and the public's about when we can get done. A lot of you heard comments about North Dean Road and East University Drive, the double left turn lanes that went out and so on, and it was painful during construction, but now that it's done, you get a lot of compliments. At least that's what some of you said. And it's better, but there will be pain points, and all of these are definitely some pain points. The College Drake intersection will be painful when we work on it, but it's necessary. Councilman Griswold lives in that vicinity, but there are a lot of accidents there. They're frequent, and that we need to improve that situation. And so we'll talk to you about our ability to deliver, but some of this is we are moving personnel from some departments to other places to try to shift around how we manage capital projects and trying to be more intentional with some things. And we're adding some staff, you'll see that shortly, to try to deal with aspects of that and get consultants to do a little more for us so we can manage the construction piece of it. So we'll carry through that. On generally speaking, I think you guys had some good comments I highlighted. I don't intend on putting these in the final document, but you can read through them yourselves. I think all of you're asking a lot of these questions. Councilman Adams had the same question you did, Mayor, listing some accidents, and we need to prioritize certain things, and we fully agree, but I think it's good to just read what you've got. School funding wise, that's a second high priority, and then I think there's just good questions being asked. Are there other funding possibilities? Public safety, facilities, and equipment. I want to be clear, this was about capital, not about the operations side, which is heavily funded in the budget. This is getting your gauge more for a police precinct, which Councilman Griswold pointed out, and a future fire station, like fire station number 7, and or the need to shift 2 to campus, and not about their daily. That is heavily funded, so I don't want anybody in the room that's not familiar with our budget to think otherwise. And then, Councilman Dawson is always, wants to make sure everybody's clear that we've got to keep the crime rate trending down, and it's essential for every other city service that we provide. And so I think that's a key. Our industrial development has been wildly successful, and our citizens don't understand how much that actually funds the city. Our occupational license fees are one of our highest sources of revenue, and this drives a good bit of that, and they do a great job with it. And you guys mainly are funding the operations of the department. The industrial board does a lot of things on its own, and in the past you have provided infrastructure and property to help make that go, and that returns big on taxes, particularly for our schools. Commercial development, a lot of good comments in here from you, just things you're interested in, concerned about, and acknowledging that maybe we ought to get, Councilwoman Witten is saying, get in the property purchase business. And what she means by that is if we want certain things on property, sometimes it's better if we own it. That is why we've been successful on the industrial front. Councilman Adams, I wish we could save the movie theater, but I don't know that that's going to happen. And then we are continuing our efforts on Opelika Road. It's ironic, we have a commercial development incentive program, and we started that in 2011, and a lot of our initial rebates are rolling off the books now for projects we did some time ago. Kevin Howard, our commercial development director, is doing a great job, and we have a lot of projects on the horizon, a lot of which are becoming redevelopment projects, and a lot of those will remain to be seen moving forward. Richland Park, I think it's a mystery to all of you what we'd be doing there. That'll be talked about by Keith Williams tomorrow, but a good bit of Richland Park has to do with baseball, softball. We do have a unique opportunity with Duck Sanford Park, which will also be introduced, but we will have the ability to acquire the remainder of the property. And since we actually finalized the budget, I got a phone call that, again, this is how fluid things are. We now have the opportunity to buy the remainder of the property we need if the water board is, Eric, willing to tango with us on their last piece that will allow us to finish out some baseball diamonds at Duck Sanford Park. I can tell you we can't reinvent property in the middle of town adjacent to a park, and I will strongly recommend as we move forward that we consider buying that and moving forward with the project at an appropriate point in time. But this is our one chance to get that property, and it is where some of the dirt was removed in between the Matchin office and the existing park. So we'll be working on that. General comments. You're right, Councilman Parsons, about the connectivity off of Sagahatchee Road over by the Pines Crossing Golf Course. That is a project. When the golf course was being expanded, the City of Auburn finance team worked heavily on the financial side of that and assisting the Indian Pines Recreation Authority. The City of Opelika has been working on the bike path, and it's moving forward. We have funds budgeted to pay our pro rata of that, but it's getting closer. I think we need a fence. It has taken too long. We don't have any matching funds for commercial for anything that we do from a federal side, but we are always looking over to turn stones. Our block grant program, we do and have used it heavily to loan on equipment for a lot of restaurants in Auburn, have loans from us that has enabled them at certain interest rates to get in and do what they need to do. Councilwoman Witten, the 2040 is currently being drafted, and a lot of the priorities, you guys have to see that document in a draft form and talk through it. That's not ready for this process. We had some delays in getting some information that we needed. Generally speaking, I looked at what the committee said. There's nothing in the budget that would be counterintuitive to it, but we do need to study that as a separate process. And then I also agree, without revenue, we can't address our other priorities. Allison Edge will proudly talk to you about revenue. We have some very unique trends going on in Auburn, very different from our peers in the Big Ten cities, and something you should be proud of as council members. And I'm proud of all that our collective efforts together are why Auburn's in a different revenue position than a lot of our counterparts. The other interesting thing is May of this year, we did have baseball, we did have graduation, but usually May is one of the worst months of the year for our retailers, and it was their best May ever. And so we're having some interesting trends, things to be proud of. You've seen them in the monthly financials, but we're going to go over that a little bit more. And then I've talked lightly about the zoning ordinance overhaul. We'll talk about that more when we get to departmental presentations, but that's also a big thing we plan to fund. A little bit more about this budget. We've talked a lot about growth. I want to remind you that that is a theme of the budget. We're growing leaps and bounds. Our city limits, if you look at the square miles, we're maintaining. In 1980, we started a manager-council form of government, really in 82, and we had 27.3 square miles of city limits. Now we have 65.7 square miles of city limits. We're maintaining all of that with the general fund budget. A little bit of sewer fund and solid waste fund, but you know what I mean. And so it's a lot. We're also annexing a lot of property, creating additional lots, and we have accelerated growth in mainly Ward 3. We have it all over town, but Ward 3 has seen the lion's share of rapid growth with a lot of lots that are under construction or about to be infrastructured. And I think the Mayor Pro Tem gets calls that are tantamount to that. So Moving forward and just my general budget proposal, just some raw numbers, and we'll get a lot deeper into these. We have a very large general fund budget of 173.8 million. It adjusts slightly down in fiscal 27. The budget's always going to ebb and flow by how much cash we're spending on things, what our debt service obligations are. So don't read into that. I think you need to read into my management team can get excitable. Our operating budgets, they do a good job of keeping things in their lane, but as we grow, they grow their operating budgets, but there's nothing about our operating budgets that are out of whack with growth, and they stay fairly steady. And all budgeted funds, you know, you have a 311.4 million in 26 and 420.8. A lot of that has to do with school debt, the bigger jump, and how money comes in and how it has to be distributed back out. So don't read into that we're living high on the hog all of a sudden in fiscal 27. And my management team's thinking they have 110 million extra somehow they got in their budget request. That's not true. And so those things will go, and then you can see our general fund expenditures ebb and flow the same way. Allison will get in a lot more to that. But if you started going back and saying, well, Megan, in fiscal 27, the general fund budget was this, and in 24 and 23, because we do so many things with the way we spend, how we spend, blending grants, we had rescue plan money, we had whatever, you can't always read into that and say that's the snapshot. You've got to look at the whole picture, and there's a bunch that goes on there. A few other things just in your booklets in front of you, you know, capital outlay, I just gave you some page numbers on page 28, projects on 33, and then outside agencies I already spoke about are on page 41. You'll get your bigger binders later, but in case you need to refer to those quickly, that's why we didn't tab them out. You'll get a full tabbed binder later this week. Okay, one of the toughest parts of my presentation for me is we are growing. I showed that to you, and here we are. My staff requested 49 positions. That's never happened in the history of Auburn, and it is because they're not asking for things they don't need. They're trying to provide not only the high-quality services that we've been providing, they want to maintain that and continue to raise the bar, and I appreciate that. Where we landed with that is there are 21 new positions proposed in fiscal 26, and there are 11 new positions proposed in fiscal 27. Like I say here, most of them were added due to new facilities, maintenance of additional infrastructure, or additional service needs, kind of across the board. And so to get your head around, we have already approved positions as 669 full-time positions with the city, and 3 are what we call regular part-time, so 3 regular part-time positions. Employed as of the end of July, we had 1,010 employees for the city of Auburn, because we have a lot of, imagine our parks and recreation camps, other things that we do, we ramp up crews in the summer. So all in, we have 1,010 employees, but 669 of them are full-time regular and 3 are part-time regular. So if that just kind of helps you get your head around what we're doing here. So where was I going with these positions and why? Like I said, everything's tied to growth. I'll give you a light overview of any of these. If you have further questions, you can ask me later. I also have a lot of experts in the room around me that can help me more with some details if needed. But public safety communications is a great place to start. Our call volumes are high. We've talked about that when we were talking about parking deck stuff, that we have a lot of calls. We have continued training and certification needs, and we need to make sure this telecommunicator also can work the console, but they also will be dealing with other training aspects and maintaining certification information. I'm adding a fire marshal. Why am I doing that? So our current fire inspectors are housed in the inspection services department. They will be moving to the fire department, but sitting in the same building they currently sit in. Be adding a fire marshal to oversee them. A lot of you ask about things like burn permits and other things. Our inspection services director, John Hoare, has been doing a great job of doing capacity inspections in some venues we may have in Auburn that like to run over capacity. Fire marshal will be taking over aspects of that, but still working hand in hand. So that's a net gain of 1 fire inspector in essence, but it's fire marshal, it's an elevated position. I also believe when you show up wearing a golf shirt that says Auburn Fire Department, people are generally nicer to you than our wonderful inspection services folks that are considered, much more regulatory. And so that is our people are great people and kind with customer service, but this has nothing to do with the wonderful job Inspection Services has done. This has to do with realigning some things for the public. We also have, in that realm, you'll see fire trucks at many various and sundry businesses throughout town. They do pre-fire inspections, and they often get called away for different EMS or fire-related calls. So we're trying to be more consistent in who's not the pre-fire planning, that stays full firefighter, fire department, but trying to be more consistent with that. And they will continue to collaborate with our inspection services folks every day. The court referral officer, this is fully funded out of some funds that judicial has from fines, but we already have one who will elevate into a supervisor position. This is, and the judge can jump in if I say it wrong, but this is more, we do a lot of referrals to rehabilitation programs and other things, and right now our current court referral officer has a backlog of 60 plus days to even meet with people to get them that help, and so this is a good program, and so we're really trying to work to get people to see somebody sooner to get them the help that they need. And so again, this is fully funded out of something else. It's fully funded, right, everybody? Did I miss that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that helps tremendously. And then you're going to see 3 in a row landscape and sustainability employees. So landscape and sustainability handles all of our right-of-way maintenance and public works, all of our beautification efforts. They handle different downtown things, community service, and street sweeping. And so if we start with the landscape and sustainability coordinator, that is another, we have one person supervising 19 people. This will be a second person. We're going to split out. One person's going to be just in charge of right-of-way and the crews that go with that, and that's mainly our mowing and other things that they do on the right-of-way, and then the other coordinator is going to take care of everybody else. And then we need to add a crew leader and a maintenance worker to backfill spaces so we have crews that work. Dan Ballard, during his presentation about the number of lane miles of road that we're maintaining and the acreage and so on, but this is purely a function of the growth of the amount of right-of-way that we have.
Megan, how does litter fall into that category?
So litter, there is what is her title, Dan? She's a crew leader. We have a crew leader that has folks that go out. We do not actually, as our staff, pick up the litter directly. We have assistants.
We do. We have voluntold assistants.
Yeah, we have voluntold assistants who do that. And so they go out and patrol. We had, Councilman Parsons had called us about a constituent on Southview that needed some right-of-way cutbacks and some other things taken care of. And then meanwhile, we sent the litter crew to pick up along the way while they were doing other work there, and then the street sweeper behind them. And so it's a coordinated effort all in once on the right-of-way crews.
So that falls under the community service piece in
Yes.
this area? Okay.
Very good. And so those are added by the need for the additional lane miles and so on. I don't think it's any surprise to you that we're adding an animal control officer. We talked a lot in the last winter about this and why the current team does a great job. We're getting a large increase of calls after hours, and we need another person. You'll see capital equipment and things that go along with this on Wednesday. And this is just by call volume and actual animals in the city limits that need to be cared for and the expectations of our citizens. And then our fleet, there are aspects of it that have grown, but it's not just growth, it is the intricacies of our fleet and our ability to turn equipment around that needs maintenance. And so we are adding, and you'll see it in 27, a mechanic each year to deal with that. There are adequate bays in the building, but the goal is we need to be as expeditious as possible, and we need more folks to get our equipment turned around faster so we can minimize downtime. The library items are different personnel you see here, which is 7, are all attributable to the new branch. So you got 5 full-time library assistants. They do general work in the library. You have the librarian that is kind of the on-site, on-the-ground coordinator, and then an assistant engagement and outreach person that, as you know, the library does a ton of programming. This helps with the new branch. And Cynthia's going to correct me if I'm wrong. We're trying to do a 40-hour. Yeah. So we're going to be running a 40-hour schedule initially at this library. There's also part-time. They're called temporary part-time. You don't see them populate in these numbers. Folks that will help are going to try to be open for 40 hours, and then we'll go we'll go from there as the new library gets going. These are not budgeted for the entire year. A lot of the budget dollars we put in 26 for facilities that aren't open yet is a partial year, knowing that we won't have these folks the entirety of the year. On the park side, Allison Hall, she's not been here long, and she keeps asking me for lots of employees. See? So we've got an athletic and parks maintenance worker. That is because we already added some folks last year for Lake Wilmore, but with the ramp up of the Lake Wilmore fields that are about to open, and then we've got Pearson Park, we needed to add another body to deal with aspects of that, and then the Mills Trail, which is in kind of Ward 5 and 6 that runs from Moore's Mill toward Town Creek Park. We just got more maintenance to do, so we're just net gaining a person. And then we have, the facilities service worker at Lake Wilmore and Pearson Park. That's a nice way of saying they clean restrooms and do other things and help around. And that's just, again, adding facilities is causing the need to have more people. I will say that it's rare that I get complaints. Sometimes our restrooms at our parks get messed up, but our team does a great job of keeping them very clean, and that's very important to us and well maintained. And so, again, what our citizens expect. On the water resource management side, the utility maintenance workers are for sewer, even though we don't have a true sewer division. It's an easier way to explain it to you guys, and that is by call volume, and we are being reactive, and we would like to be proactive on some things. Those are funded by the sewer fund, however they blend in the total number of employees and necessary for what we're doing. Alinda, she's fairly new too, and she thought she should have a new person in human resources, but as we gain employees, we need to gain services to them, and this is a lot of different training. They do training and certifications, a lot to keep up with there, and then we also, as we grow in size, we grow in risk management claims, and we have one full-time person that deals with risk management matters, and that's damaged tires, motor vehicle accidents. He also dabbles in CDL licenses, but workman's comp, all kinds of things. And we need a backup for McCarthy, who does a great job for us, but we need somebody that helps take some of that load off. So they're doing a few jack of all trade things, but that's what they'll be doing. And then last but not least, we have a brand new facility at our Auburn Center for Developing Industries, a new business center. And we need a staff member. Our workforce development team will be there, and our entrepreneurial person will be there, but they're in and out, and we need somebody to run the center. This will have a lot of trainings for our industry and private sector folks, and at times the city will use it, but they need somebody that's full-time managing the operations of the center. So that, I'll remind you, Congressman Rogers delivered a grant that helped tremendously with that center, and then the industrial board put several $1 million in it as well. It's a beautiful facility, and when they get ready to open it, the council will be out touring it, and it's something to be proud of. In fiscal 27, we're adding 6 firefighters. Why I put rescue truck next to this is because, and Chief Kane will catch me if I don't get this one quite right, but at the end of the day, we need to add a entire team of people that all they do is work on the rescue truck. That's the best way I can put it in English, because right now they're assigned to an engine or a ladder, and they go out on calls regularly, and if we need them on the rescue truck, we've got to pull them off of a different apparatus to get there. So this would mean, out of our busiest station, one, that we are full-time running the rescue truck, which is paid dividends over time, and not in this budget. I'll propose to you to continue to add personnel to the rescue truck for other areas of town. We're not quite there yet, but this is headed in that direction. So obviously these firefighters are also talented paramedics, but the position is still a firefighter position. So just FYI. And I think that's great the way that we've done it, because our firefighters also can do both. We don't have anybody just pigeonholed as a paramedic. They're all firefighter paramedics if they are. So on another position that we're adding is just a heavy equipment operator. Again, that goes into landscape and sustainability for public works, and that's rounding out some of the positions we previously added. Bush hog counts as heavy equipment operator, Dan? And so that's really what that means. But that is, again, gaining all the lane miles. One more mechanic in environmental services, and then Allison, she got to asking for things again. So what's happened is we've added facilities, and you think of things like City Market, which is one of our most successful programs we do, and we're at the point that we have facilities that are getting harder to program because we have the personnel that is currently doing all of our programming is occupied with the events they're already doing. So this is by growth and by citizens' interests. We want to do and offer more things, so we want to add this person. Same with league sports. Our league sports numbers are growing, and to provide best service to the different adult and youth leagues, this would be another person that is added to that team to deal with those leagues. And then last but certainly not least, we need one more athletic and parks maintenance worker for the Boykin campus as we open that. That is somebody that will take care of a lot of the grounds in that facility area around the cultural center, library, et cetera. Just a full-time person to do the grounds there. All right. Okay. Next, and carrying on, I'm going to be very popular with some employees, hopefully. I'm proposing to you on the personnel side, we're only as good as the people who work here. This is one of the most challenging things we do. We have great employees. I want to keep them here, providing the quality services. So as usual and customary and very heavily looked at as from an affordability standpoint, we are still at a 3% cost of living that I am proposing for you to approve for fiscal 26 and 27. And what does that mean for all of our regular employees? We have a merit system. Sometimes people, due to longevity working for the city, are not due a merit raise, but they would get a cost of living. And of our regular employees. We have pegged this against inflation for how many year trend, Stephen?
About 25 years.
Going back about 25 years, and there were some years where our employees did not get a cost of living, but overall we are to the good on the side of inflation, where we're not crazy big or anything, but we keep this balance with the cost of living where it is. I looked at a lower cost of living, I looked at a higher one, and we're still landing right around 3%, is keeping us above where inflation would be really stinging our employees. So in doing that, some of them get what we call merit raises based on longevity here on their annual performance appraisals. Some are not eligible just because of longevity in the system. We also do career ladder, which is if you get master's degrees, extra certifications, go through a lot of things, you can get a little bump in pay by increasing your skills, which really makes you even more valuable to us. We take great care with our medical and dental, and we have a little health clinic, City Care, and we offer some other health benefits. With that, though, still comes some challenges for us to be able to afford everything that we're doing. So while I want to maintain competitive benefits, and if you look at us compared to the university, and I'm not picking on the university, our health care is less expensive, and we provide almost identical plans. And we benchmark in the region to remain competitive. However, healthcare costs are just going up. You know, our per person costs in the plan can escalate in the 10 to 15% range a year if you're not careful. And so we have to make some changes. So the goal of we have a self-insurance fund is to carry 2 months of claims. And so we're increasing some of the funding from the general fund for that. But meanwhile, the employees will also be paying pro rata portions of that. We last went up in fiscal 23 on our insurance premiums, and I'm proposing some increases here. Single coverage, I didn't do percentages. The employee plus spouse, employee plus child, and family are all running in the 5% range. We had to go with a higher percentage for single coverage because it has been kind of paying less than its pro rata lately. We did a big study, and the study actually recommended I do more than double what the number here is. It's a $14 a month increase. But if you start looking at single coverage, in essence, will cost an employee $168 more a year. The employee plus one, $173.80 more per year. Employee plus child is $130.80 more a year, and then family coverage $211.68 more a year. I don't ever want to go up on this. This is employees are contributing to rising costs. If we don't go up on this, the general fund has to subsidize that piece more. We were subsidizing everybody. Linda, it's $500 per employee per month, or per plan holder per month, and then we're increasing that subsidy to $650 per plan holder per month, and we're still, and that's why I'm also asking for an increase. Our employees will also see a deductible increase, which isn't abnormal for any plan that you're in. I do think, I've had some people ask before about, is it still financially wise to remain self-insured? And I can have our finance director, she'll nod at you, but there isn't It would be, we have no control over a plan once we're not self-insured, nor these costs. And these, we do have choices about what we do and how we take care of our employees. Those would be mandatory with no choice in those and escalating costs. So we try to remain competitive. We are extremely competitive, and I say we're far lower than the university. However, we try to share in those costs between what the general fund is subsidizing and what our employees are paying. Sometimes we have some high claim years. We're not trying to make it all up there, and we certainly want to be here for our employees and retirees and when they need us. So we could talk about employee compensation and benefits all day long, but these are major things that are permeating throughout the budget that you won't necessarily directly see as much as I want to point them out to you. And last but certainly not least are just the comparative overview of our general fund budget. Allison's going to be crossing into a few things coming up where she'll talk more about this. Our ending fund balance in both fiscal 26 and 27, is high. It's 84.8 million and 79.5 million respectively. That is because we end up with revenue can be higher than we projected. We also aren't spending money down on capital projects as fast as we would like to. I don't believe at my core in sitting on the taxpayer dollar. So when you look at the next ratio, the net ending fund balance ratio, my goal is to not have that lower than 25%, and it's almost double that in the 48.8% range and 47.3% range. And if I get it lower, that's all well and good. Our rating agencies don't like it. They'd like for that to be at 100%. And again, I don't feel that we should be sitting on the taxpayer dollars in a growing community. We need to spend on capital projects and operations what they're expecting. However, the rating agencies like them in that 40% range, and they've been there for quite a while. The entire time I've been in this role and assistant city manager and a little bit before that. So just know that those are there. Also, with adding positions, I try to keep all personnel expenses below a 50% margin, and it's personal services as a percentage total of our expenditures. And OFU means other funding uses, right? And so it always sounds weird to me, but minus capital projects. So what does that mean? I'm not giving credit for the large dollars of capital projects. I'm saying, well, here's probably a real number. Capital outlay vehicles and equipment are in there because we use them, but keeping those percentages below 50% in 26 and 27. If you build capital projects in, it drives the number down. So what I'm showing you is we as a city, a lot of cities run that number in the 70 to 80% range. Personnel is a net out of their total expenses, and we don't do that. We keep lean, we take good care of our people, but I also have a lot of people that work very hard every day, and just by our peer growth, in addition to facilities, we needed to add some people. So generally speaking, and I had nice little circly things I was going to do for you, but I talked through them anyway. Generally speaking, it's the end of my financial overview. What we're going to do is Allison will pop in for a few minutes to do an overview before a break. She's going to give you a brief overview, and then we'll take a break before she gets into the other financials. Pass all your stuff. Here it is. There's nowhere to set it.
The capital improvement projects are generally not done by our people. Is that the rationale of subtracting that out?
Capital projects, well, what it is I'm looking at this more as what is it taking for the people themselves and the city to operate. If I include capital projects, it makes it look like we should add a lot more employees, and I'm not advocating for that. If you leave capital projects in, it makes the percentage lower than it should be.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, like Megan mentioned, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Does this work, or are you doing it?
It works.
Okay. This time, if you remember back in 2023, some of you remember that we did a little Budget 101 class for the new council members. Not everybody came to that, but several of you were there. We toss out a lot of terms. We talk about things that make perfect sense to us, but probably don't make a lot of sense to others. maybe not even to you sometimes, but definitely not to the public. So what I'm going to do in this first section is talk about some general terms as it relates to government budgeting, our financial reporting, our accounting, that kind of thing. And it will help, hopefully, you as you go through the bigger document and see some of those terms, making sure you understand the types of funds we have, things like that, and some of the terms that we use. So we're going to flip through that real quick. So the most important thing to remember about government accounting is that we have a very different purpose. So I hear a lot of comments from time to time about, I've owned a business, this doesn't make sense to me, I know all of these things, but generally, you don't, because government accounting is so very different because of our environmental factors. And the ones that you see listed on this slide, the first one being profit motive versus service motive. Our motivation in everything that we do is to provide service. We're not looking to make money. And so the information that we need and you need to make decisions, the information that is out there for the public, is serving that purpose to demonstrate that service motive, not the fact that we're trying to earn money. And so financials have to be presented in a certain way to show that. And that starts with the budget and it ends with the annual report at the end of the year. That focus is just very important. Right? And governmental, in general, is a very near-term focus. When you deal with a budget, you're basically dealing with inflows, cash coming in, and outflows, cash going out. And so that's a very near-term focus. If you've ever looked at our general fund balance sheet, you don't see long-term assets on there. There are no capital assets on there. You know that we have those and we buy those, but we don't present those the same way that you might see in a business. Our proprietary funds do, and I'll talk about that. But for that general fund, it's about what are we doing in this year? How much revenue do we have coming in? What are we spending? And then what are those reserves at the end of the year, which sometimes can be pretty big. So that motive governs a lot about why accounting looks like it does. The other one is return on investment versus stewardship. So when you think about a business, we're thinking about earnings per share, things like that. We don't have anything like that. I don't think it would make a whole lot of sense to say we have this much net position for every citizen. That's not going to be a comparable thing. And so stewardship is where we land with that. That's what we need to know. Our financial information from the budget all the way to the annual report needs to show our citizens what we're doing with taxpayer dollars, what we're doing with money that they have paid to us. There's not always a direct correlation between what they pay and what they get. So when you go in and make a purchase and pay sales tax, nobody's thinking about the fact that they get to drive on the road or they get to play in the park or they get to do anything like that. They can't make that correlation. So our financial reporting demonstrates that for them. It shows stewardship. Here's what we said we were going to do. We're required to show budget to actual at the end of the year. And here's how we did, that kind of thing. So that's another environmental factor that drives what we do. And then appropriated budget versus financial plan. If you have your own business or if you have ever worked for a private business, you know that a budget is very flexible. They make a budget. If it doesn't work out, they just change it. Very different from the force of law that this has. When you adopt a budget ordinance, it is a law. We, as I guess you would, the ones administering that budget, have to follow the law just like we do any other law, and just like we do creditor documents, grant documents, things that tell us how we can spend money. Our budget is the same. So it's very important that we are presenting financial information that shows that we did that. So those factors, you look at the next little part of this slide, the impact of those factors is what you see here. Measurement focus means what is important to measure. What types of financial transactions do the citizens need to know to demonstrate stewardship? So that's where you come into, you don't see capital assets on the balance sheet of a general fund. And the reason for that is what we care about at that point is the money that was used to buy that asset right then. Okay, we don't care about the use of it over 5 years. I don't want to say we don't care. We do care, but in financial information that is given, that's not important right then. That outflow is important. So that's why you don't see that. You don't see depreciation, you don't see, the only debt you see in the general fund are the debt payments that are due that year. What's due in 2030 doesn't really matter right now. What matters is that I can cover my cost right then for that year. And then fund accounting comes from that. And so I know that we say all the time, the self-insurance fund, the Fund 107, the Fund 110, 510, the sewer fund, we use that terminology all the time, and I think a lot of people don't really understand exactly what that means. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that in just a second. And then the other thing is budgetary reporting. So if the budget has the force of law, then we have to report on that. We have to show people what we do. Governmental funds, like the general fund, are the only ones in which we're required to budget. We don't have to budget proprietary funds. So our sewer fund and our solid waste, we don't have to budget that. But we do it because that gives our citizens a better idea of how we're doing. We choose to do that, and it kind of lets you know what we're doing. So the objectives of our financial reporting primarily are our current year revenues sufficient to cover what we need to do? And that includes using reserves from prior years. But how is our year looking? Are we doing things in compliance with the law? So we have lots of laws and grant requirements, things like that that we have to follow. Our financials have to tell whether we did that or not. And then can our users look at that annual report and kind of see how we're doing? So you will see something in the budget document about department initiatives, or you will hear presentations from those department heads about how they are doing. That is part of stewardship. You know, what are they doing and how well are they doing it? All right, so fund accounting just in general, what does it mean? Because we talk about it all the time. It's basically how are we going to present all these different funding sources that we have. Funding comes from all over the place. Some of those funding sources have very specific constraints on them, and so we have to present them in a way that lets everyone know how we're using those constrained funds. So what exactly is a fund? A fund is its own entity. It is a full set of books, and we have 20 some odd, maybe 30 funds right now. Every single one of them is a full set of books. It has assets, liabilities, revenues, it has expenditures or expenses, depending on what type of fund it is. And we're managing all of those things at one time. So when you get that bigger budget document and you see that all aggregated funds together, you will see every one of those types in there. That's what a fund is. And it's based on constraint. So funds are going to be designed to show you whether funds are constrained or not. We have three major categories: governmental funds, proprietary funds, and fiduciary funds. Governmental, that's going to be your main government operations. General funds, special revenue funds, capital projects funds. Completely different focus, that's your current focus, and we have a whole set of accounting standards that go specifically with that focus. It's called the modified accrual basis of accounting. So you'll see very different things there than what you see in the proprietary fund or the business-like activities. And proprietary funds are just that. Their main source of revenue comes from user charges. That's our sewer fund and our solid waste fund. Very similar accounting to a business, although the terminology is a little bit different. The last one, which we don't have a lot of, but fiduciary funds, we do have one set of fiduciary funds that you can find in our annual report. That is when you're accounting for funds that don't benefit us as the government. It benefits those outside the government, and those are our athletic organizations, like baseball, softball, soccer, those kinds of things. We're acting as a fiduciary for that, so we are involved in everything that goes on with those boards. All right, real quick, the governmental funds that you will see in this budget document. The general fund, it is the fund that we use for our daily operations. Everything is there as long as it's not required or if we choose to put it in another fund. Everything is there. Police, Public Works, Parks and Rec, Finance, OCM, all of those things are there. And there is only one. You can have one general fund in your organization. We have a few little sub-funds. That's where your self-insurance fund comes in, risk retention fund, where we're managing workers' comp and things like that. But when we report on those at the end of the year, they have to all be rolled up. It is one fund. So when you talk about being self-insured and we pay our own claims, it's essentially the general fund paying those claims, along with employees with their share of premiums, right? All in one fund, in the general fund. It's mainly what we focus on these budget presentations because it is the biggest and it is the majority of our operations. Special revenue funds is a funding source that is either restricted or committed. And the only difference between restricted and committed is restricted is an outside party restricting and putting constraints on those funds like the state. Committed means that you as a body could potentially restrict funds if you wanted to do that, which we, I think, generally stay away from earmarking, that kind of thing. That's the only difference. If we do have a type of restriction like that, we have to put it in a special revenue fund so that we can demonstrate that we accounted for things correctly. Examples of that are the 16 mil ad valorem taxes that's for education. We have to keep that completely separate so that we can demonstrate everything that's happened. Gas tax is another one. The state has gas tax. The state says the only thing you can do with that gas tax is do road construction, resurfacing, those kinds of things. That has to go in a special revenue fund, and we have to report on it to the state. So that's what those funds are used for. A lot of grant-related things, anytime there is that external restriction on it. Capital projects funds, you don't see in the budget. You see capital projects, but capital projects generally span more than 1 year. And it makes sense that you're not going to see a specific budget for a project that's going to last 3 years because we're not looking at it on an annual basis. Capital projects funds, for us, you can choose to use them anytime, but the only time we use them is when we borrow money to build the project. So the borrowing proceeds go in the capital projects fund. We spend on that project based on project budgets and not annually adopted budgets. Okay, we do that and manage those. And then the debt service is paid out of the general fund. Okay, that's when we use those funds. And then debt service, last one, is a fund where there is a revenue source that is restricted in some way to pay debt service. That's our 5 mil ad valorem tax. The state says all you can do with that is pay debt service on a project that the voters approved. Remember, we did 2 school projects. We decided back in 2015 to do school projects with that, and so we are right now paying back school debt with that 5 mil tax. Has to be in a debt service fund because the restriction on it is specifically for debt service. So you'll see that in the big document as well. Those are all together kind of as governmental funds, and you'll be able to see it together.
When does that expire for?
It
when
never
do we-
expires.
I mean, when do we redetermine or what it's used for next?
Yes, so we have already determined that it will not be used for education again. And there really wasn't ever any intention for it to continue being education. We funded those 2 projects, which was the high school or whatever it was we financed with it. I can't remember exactly the schools, but as it develops and as we pay down debt and there's more capacity, and you'll see that in your budget document, we're going to use it for our own projects. So right now, it is expected that it will fund a portion of Richland Park. That's the plan right now. Historically, we have used that for parks and recreation projects because, the voters have to approve it, and those have generally been the most favorable types of projects to take to the voters. That's what they're most interested in. It could be, transportation or traffic as we see that develop. It could be anything like that. But it will be something for us next time, not education.
And when will that happen?
As soon as there's enough capacity to. So if we do, right now we feel like we could probably have enough capacity to do about 20 million in debt. And so that would be about half of what we're expecting in the budget for Richland Park. So whenever that comes online, we would do that. All right, proprietary funds, just real quick, enterprise funds, that's our sewer and solid waste. This is when there's a user fee for it. I think you probably know more about that than anything else right now just because of what we just went through with the solid waste fund. There is one other one. We do not have an internal service fund right now, but I do want to point it out because it is an option that is out there that we talk about from time to time. And the only difference in it is that we are providing service internal to the government. So an example of that would be like fleet services. If we ever decided that we want to try to run it like a business and let it, provide service and bill the departments so we could see kind of how that function is working, then that's something you would use as an internal service fund and it would work like a business. Right? So with those funds, looking at the types of kind of categories that are within those funds, the types of accounts that we use, and what you see in your budget document the most are these descriptions right here. So for revenues, you're going to see your taxes and fees and charges and all of those things. Other financing sources are basically transfers and borrowing proceeds. So it's going to be anything that we have coming in as a funding source that is atypical of our daily operations. That's what an other financing source is. And then on the expenditure side, the expenditures are going to be personal services. That's all about people. It's going to be everything related to our employees. Contractual is going to be when we go out and hire somebody to provide a service to the city. It's going to be utilities, things like that. Commodities, those are things. So we're going to have office supplies here, vehicle parts. Anything that doesn't qualify as a capital item based on our threshold is going to be in your commodity section. So when you see those totals, those types of things are what make that up. So capital outlay, anything over 5,000, that's our capitalization threshold right now. That is what you see budgeted in capital outlay. So in your packet that you got today, I think there is a list of capital outlay. Those are things that are going to be more costly and have a longer life. Doesn't mean we're going to depreciate them in the general fund. We still just see that cash going out, but we do track those just like we would an asset in any other type of accounting. We have projects. Anytime you see the word debt service, a lot of times people don't understand what that means. That just means the payments. We're servicing the debt. And the only debt service that you will see in the general fund is that current year's debt service. And then support services, outside agency support, and then transfers. And so that transfer category can be really big. So if you remember, we send a good bit of our sales tax to Auburn City Schools, and that is shown and recorded as a transfer. And so those will be really big. A little bit on the terminology. Expenditures is for those governmental funds because it is about the money going out. It's the outflow. When you look at a proprietary fund, an enterprise fund like solid waste, we use the term expense because it is a true economic expense. Everything associated with that function falls into that fund, and it's more of an economic resources focus there. And so we use the term expense. And so you'll see both in the budget document, which I think sometimes confuses the reader a little bit. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Any questions about any of that?
Questions? All right. Break?
Break?
All right. 5 minutes?
Awesome.
It's up to you. Yep.
Okay.
Because what we have is Allison will just go over revenue, et cetera, so
Okay.
5 minutes.
All right, 5 minutes.
Takes.
Yep.
And who had,
Okay, everybody about ready?
I'm gonna put a little salt on these.
All right, the money. Here we go.
with the almonds?
We're going to jump into revenue real quick, just a recap of something that Megan had on the screen, which was that general fund summary altogether. I like the little graphic at the bottom where you can kind of see how revenue has changed from year to year. Revenue generally goes up, and as Megan mentioned about expenditures, revenue is the same way in that from year to year, we can have one-time revenues that can skew our revenue from year to year. It could be up one year and then down the next. That doesn't mean it's declining. It might mean that there's a one-time revenue. So just kind of showing this graphic to you and providing that in your slide. So the city's top 10 revenue sources that you see on this slide, 90% of our revenue are in these top 10, with 70 to 80% being in the top 5. And that is huge. And the reason it is huge is because very few of these, the council can actually change. Okay, so that's a big deal. Sales tax is the number one revenue source. This council does have the authority to change that so far. Hasn't changed. Occupation license fees, when I talk about that, it is now, the state has capped that in place, and so it is at 1%. We cannot raise that. It's one, I'll talk about it a little bit more We have to be very diligent in watching legislative activity related to this one because it is our second largest source. Business license fees, there are 4 things that make that up, and I'll talk more about that. And then ad valorem, surprisingly, is only the 4th largest source in the general fund, but remember that that is just 5 mills. The 16 mills that goes to education is in one of those special revenue funds, and then the other 5 mills is in the debt service fund. And then the simplified seller's use, I want to talk a little bit about that because it's a bit of a controversial revenue source right now. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. Public safety charges to AU, that's contractual, and that is right now contractually, that goes up 5% every year. That's for the police and fire and all the services that public safety provides for the university. Lodging taxes, I will talk about it. It is not in the top 5, but I want to mention a couple of specific things about that. We always talk about construction permits just because they're so volatile and they change a lot. And then fines and court fees and franchise fees round out the top 10 there. All right, so sales and use tax. This is information back to 2018 on this chart, and then we also have where we expect to end 2025, and then we have the budget for 26 and 27. You probably don't remember, but I remember very clearly that I stepped out of my comfort zone last year, and I budgeted 5% for sales tax, and we expect to end the year at 5.9%, and that was way too close for me. So you'll see these projections being a little bit lower, and the reason for that is something that Megan mentioned. Across the state, we are one of the only municipalities that is seeing increase in sales tax right now. Huntsville, if you saw the article about Huntsville, they had to ask their departments to cut their budget. Okay, so I would much rather be in a position to have a little bit more sales tax than we expected, as opposed to getting to the middle of the year and saying, hey, everyone, you don't have any money left, and you're going to have to cut your budget, and making them make that decision. It's a really hard place to be. So keeping things a little conservative, I think there is a lot of uncertainty remaining in the economy right now. Tariffs, all the things that happen at the federal level are things that we have to consider. We're still kind of waiting to see what happens with interest rates, things like that. So being a little conservative here, we do have 3%. It's not that's conservative, but it's very realistic when you look at historically we took averages and kind of took half of that, and that's kind of where we are with sales tax right now. Obviously, very impacted by Auburn University, sales tax is. Also heavily impacted by our commercial development. I said last year, Buc-ee's made a difference in our sales tax, something that we could see as soon as they opened. So commercial development is very important. Football season, we do a lot of analysis of football season. I keep those schedules there. I love this chart that is in your monthly financials that you get that shows these monthly cycles. Things change throughout the year. What you can see though, and does this have a pointer?
They can't see it.
Oh.
I mean, they can't see the
I got
pointer.
You. I'm
Yep.
with you. You can't see it on your screen. So the maroon colored line that dips way down at the beginning, that one that's at the top, the one that remains at the top, that dip is because that was November collections this past fall. Remember, we didn't have any home games in October. So that's the kind of cycles that we see based on the football schedule. It matters if they're good. It matters who the coach is. It matters who we're playing. It matters what time the game is. So the schedule that I have right now, I already have the times of some of these games laid out, and it makes a difference in how we project sales tax. Christmas has an impact on it. We are now seeing a tremendous impact during the winter from basketball. It's a lot different. You can see that outside of that 1 month where we didn't have home games, we are above all the other years for every month of this year. And including May, as Megan mentioned, generally summertime we see lower collections than we have historically, but there are so many things going on now. However many sessions we do of Camp War Eagle now. We have how many graduation ceremonies do we have? There's just so much going on, and we're definitely seeing the impact from that. So a lot of things to consider there. Right. Occupational license, as I mentioned, is our second largest source. It is 1% of gross wages. I always get the question about, why do I need to pay for the luxury of working in the city of Auburn? That's how a lot of people view that. But the reason for that is because when you have something like Auburn University and other organizations that are tax exempt, and they own a lot of property in this city, we're not getting a lot of property tax from them. You also have them and our industrial businesses as large employers. People drive in from other places, they drive on our streets, they do all of those things, and we don't get a whole lot of revenue from them, but they are using our services. So a couple of things that go into that. This is a very important revenue source for us. It's going to pass, it's been about 19 million. We're projecting it to be 19.3 at the end of 25. By 27, the expectation is it will be over 20 million. It has grown. We're projecting it to be 4.5% higher at the end of 25 than last year. So a little bit slower growth than we've seen in some prior years. So again, that revenue projection, we're keeping fairly conservative there as we move through the year. And like I mentioned, we have to pay attention. There are a lot of legislators in the state that, you know, some think that having something like that maybe prohibits industry from wanting to come or something like that. We see the very opposite of that. So we have to pay attention and be sure that we are speaking when we need to speak if someone is kind of going after that and potentially wanting it to go away. It's going to be a tremendous impact on
Allison,
us.
Auburn has had an occupational tax since 1973, I believe.
70.
70.
70.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've had it for a long time and we're very dependent on it.
Certainly, I want to stop and say thank you to our state representatives and senators. A couple of years ago, this was under the gun, and they fought for us along with our lobbying group down in Montgomery and some other of us. And I appreciate all the effort, the combined effort.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think you can see, though, did you expect this out of the gate to be the second highest source of revenue? I mean,
Right.
if you're not ingrained in our financials, you don't know how important it is. But without this, you can look at the hits to the general fund. If we don't have this, it's a tremendous gap in funding that we have.
Do we know, is there a way to know? At one time, I think the chamber and the city did a study on industry employees and where they lived as it related to them attending our schools. Do we know?
Should be right around that 70 or so percent. It ebbs and flows, Philip. 70% do not live, of over 5,000 manufacturing employees, do not live in Auburn. Roughly 30% do. It's ebbed and flowed between 20 and 30% over the years, depending on the type of company.
And with like remote workers and so forth, how does that account for occupational tax?
It's a
Depends.
big enforcement issue,
Right.
but we have seen that gradually go up as enforcement, and people are educated on the fact that it's there. People that are working remotely here, their headquarter business may be way away somewhere, so it's sometimes difficult to figure that out, but we have begun to grow that and make sure that people are remitting the way they should. Yep. Okay. Business licenses is our third largest source. That is made up of our general business licenses and residential rental, which are going to be anybody that is renting their property for residential rent, big apartment complexes and rental houses, whatever the case may be, not short-term rental. So keep that in mind.
Not what?
Not short-term rental. This is long-term residential rental. Commercial rental, it's a very small revenue source, but it is grouped here. And then contractor's license, which is that 0.25% that contractors pay when they are in construction in our city. Part of that happens during the permitting process, I believe, yeah. So it's increased an average of 7% over the past 10 years. An important thing to remember about this one is that it is mostly, there are a few exceptions, but mostly calculated on prior year's gross receipts. So what's happened in the prior calendar year is going to affect what we would collect in a business license revenue in the next year, the next calendar year. So we have to kind of look at it on a little bit of a different cycle than we're looking at other revenue sources. Projected to be 8.6 higher than fiscal 24, and this one's budgeted right now at 2.8, which is looking at various averages and things that are happening within that revenue source. My thought at this point is that we will be higher than that, and so that's something that we will adjust at mid-biennium and account for the fact that it is probably gonna be higher
I
than
also know
that.
you have the lag in there because of the way in which business license
Yes.
revenue's
Yeah.
gone. That's why I know it sounded like that's supposed to be in there, but
Yeah.
it's in there because it's a year lag.
Right, and a lot of times we are able to kind of look at that from the sales tax perspective, like how sales tax has grown in the prior year, but sales tax, growing by 5.9% is slower than it has been growing in the past, so there's a little bit of conservative estimate here for what we would see next year. And so, I would expect that we'll increase this sum at mid-biennium.
Allison, there's a license here to rent a house. And there's also a tax on the rental income, two different things.
No,
I'm
there's
missing,
no tax on the rental income. Right.
Not from the city.
Just making sure I'm not missing
Yeah.
something.
Not from the city,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
You and the IRS or the state, and that could be a different situation,
Right.
but not from the city.
Residential rental is what they pay. And that's long-term rental, though. Yep. Yep. All right. Property tax, ad valorem is the fourth largest source. That's the 5 mills that comes to the general fund, can be used for any purpose. So it's going to sit in the general fund. It is not restricted in any way. We use that for all of our general government services. It is the most stable revenue source of all of them, but we know how hard it is to change that. You have absolutely no control over that. We have to go through the state legislature anytime we want to increase it, and then our voters have to vote on that. It is a very hard tax to get increased, for that to be approved. So just keeping that in mind, that you have little control over. 7.9%. One thing too to mention is that the state did cap assessed value growth. And so that's capped at 7%. And so it's something that we're into this first year of that cap being in place, a little uncertain about what we will see with that. And so the revenue projections here are a little conservative until we see how that might look. So assessed value cannot increase more than 7%. All right, so we have a 2.7% projection over 25 for 26 and 27. Okay, our fifth largest source. So in 2024, I believe it was 2024, when we surpassed our public safety charges to AU's contractual revenue source. This became the fifth largest revenue source. And this is the tax that we pay when we shop online at Amazon or something like that. It's for remote sellers. Generally, it's for those that don't have nexus in the state, which means they don't have a physical location in the state. We have seen the state make some decisions on that maybe aren't the best, where some have been allowed to participate in this program. The tax itself is 8%. The state gets 50% of that right off the bat. It's every purchase that is shipped anywhere in Alabama. It's a state shared tax. They get 50%. The remaining 50% is distributed to cities and counties, 60-40, and by population. So once our population was updated after the 2020 census, when it was finally updated, we saw a big spike in that revenue source. It is expected to be nearly $8 million by the end of 2027. So it is it's becoming a very important revenue source, but it is also, as I mentioned, very controversial because it is less than we might potentially get in sales tax, something that we aren't certain about. We haven't seen all the data on that. You may have seen some articles. There have been a number of cities that have been fighting against the state on this. There are possibly a lawsuit coming from a couple of those cities. The dilemma is that there are competing interests in this. So when you have a state shared tax, you have a number of very small cities and counties in Alabama that get a portion of that. These small cities don't even have a sales tax, and they're getting a portion of this. And so they've had it since 2016, and now, if we were to switch the method somehow, they would all of a sudden get nothing. There's a lot to it. And it's not incorrect that we are potentially losing there, but it's just a very delicate thing that we need to deal with. And if we take a position on that at some point, we just need to be very careful about that.
Generally speaking, we are careful about legislative positions. We work hard to advocate for things that would work well for the city of Auburn, but we usually don't come out guns a-blazing. Occupational license bill is one of the few where we were adamantly opposed to some changes. Same here is we are still trying to measure as a city. The mayor deals with this with the Big Ten mayors all the time is I'm very pleased with the revenue we are receiving from this. And the number one thing I don't recommend that we do is take a chance in losing the revenue we are receiving. So that's our first and number one goal is to retain this source of revenue. If there can be some changes that help us get more funds, we will look at that, but we're going to move very carefully and methodically, and we have taken no position on anything legally going on and don't intend to at this time.
All right. Okay, so that was the top 5. Just a couple of others to mention. Lodging tax, remember, is 13%. 7% of that is City of Auburn. Also keep in mind that we give 1/7 of this lodging tax to AO Tourism monthly. This lodging tax has grown, and so has that transfer to AO Tourism. We are projecting lodging tax to end the year 11.2% higher than last year. And the reason for that primarily is the Graduate, the downtown hotel. Looking at analysis of adding the Graduate and then seeing kind of cannibalization and how that might have happened from other hotels, it's just not there. So it's, there's a lot of additional. I think the growth without it is about 3% in lodging tax. So definitely makes a difference. I have projected 4% in fiscal '26. My expectation with the AC hotel opening is that will probably be higher, but again, still a little uncertainty there, just trying to make sure that we capture that appropriately and are not forecasting too much and then having to reduce that later. But we will see that come on. I would expect it to be similar, that we will see an increase in lodging tax with that.
Short-term rentals, do they also collect a 13% lodging tax?
They do. They are supposed to.
The ones that have actually,
Follow the rules?
yes.
Right.
Okay. And then do we know, so 7% comes to us, and then the rest goes to state and county. The tourism remittance, I know we get reports from tourism, but do we get a report of those dollars and how they're utilized within our city?
Not to the city directly. I know the mayor has a seat on the board, and the thing is it's not something that was required for reporting the way the ordinance was written. We did that in December of 2005 is when that 1/7 came along because we increased lodging taxes, and then it was effective sometime in early calendar 2006, and so it was it was earmarked at that time for operating needs for AO Tourism. Earmarked by what the ordinance said, not in how we deliver it to them.
Do you have an estimate of the dollar amount that goes to AO Tourism?
It's be the 1/7 of the
It's
total lodging
1/7.
tax.
It varies from month to month,
Yep.
but anywhere from 35,000 a month to, it could go up to 50. It just depends on the collections in that month. Yep. Right. So construction permits is the last one that I wanted to mention, just because it changes a lot. It is obviously driven by development. It's only about 1% of our revenue, but you look at something like 2024 when we had 1.7 million, or even back in 2020 when it was very high, and then you see it come down. A lot of that has to do with the number of permits, but then the valuations from year to year. So it's real hard to compare year to year. This year, we actually have more single-family permits, but we had a bigger valuation, larger things last year. So that revenue is going to be a little bit less than it was last year. So we have settled on 1.5 million just as an average to budget, because that is a good kind of middle of the line. And then if it's more, then that's great. Generally, we do rise just above 1.5 million. So I've got that in the budget as well.
And Allison, is this construction permits for anything that's being constructed?
Yes.
Okay.
All of it, yep.
Except for university projects on their
yeah.
property, correct?
Yep.
Research Park does or does not. Yep.
Yeah.
Sometimes though, if we do extra work, sometimes we do get some fees in exchange for, but typically we don't. Nothing at the university is handled differently.
All right, and then just last slide on revenue is just total revenue. Again, total revenue is important, but we do have to take into account it can include one-time revenues that make it not as comparable from year to year. Concentrating on those top 5, because that is 70 to 80% of the revenue, is where we spend most of our time. But you do see that it's a good trend line. Total revenue does go up, and in total, at the end of this year, even with the larger increases in some of those specific revenue sources, our total revenue is only going up 4%, and that's because of some of those one-time things that happened in '24. And fiscal '26 and '27 are 2.3% and 2.4% overall. Did want to mention lastly, before I move on to debt, is that our levy of taxes, our ordinance, our city code allows for a revenue review, which is something that the last time we did that was in 2015. We were doing it about every 5 years, and in 2020, obviously, we were not going to do a revenue review, not even in a couple of years after that. That revenue review is pretty much an extensive review of all the revenue sources that we have. We provide a lot of information to the council on, how they can be changed, what's the legal authority for them, all of that. And then there are recommendations if there's anything that the staff sees that we think may need to be changed or tweaked, if it's, within your purview to do that. And so our expectation is that towards the end of 2026, we are going to get that process started. It's time to do it again. And that'll give the council at that time an opportunity to review all of those very closely and just make sure that we feel like things are in place the way they need to be. And that would be in preparation for the next biennium with that, to make changes to that. All right, so debt. Debt is a wonderful tool that we use with these big capital projects, but it needs to be managed wisely. Our debt policy is that we only issue debt for very, very big, long-term capital assets. Things are going to last a long time. We borrowed for Lake Wilmore, we borrowed for Will Beatner Parkway, things like that. We're not going to borrow generally for even big capital outlay like a fire truck. We tend to not go in that direction. We cash fund those. So these are going to be big projects. Anytime you see a borrowing happening, that's when we're going to utilize that capital projects fund, put those borrowing proceeds in there and manage that project that way. Our expectation, and I will say, this debt is a little out there. Towards the end of 2027 is when we would expect to issue again for debt that would be funded by the general fund. Keep in mind that those dates have nothing to do with when the project starts. Once we do a reimbursement resolution, if you approve that, we have 18 months to issue the debt. And so we forecast that we're going to wait as long as we can to make sure that we have everything, we know everything about it and everything's in place. And so these are forecasted a little bit further out. With that being a little bit further out, a lot can change between now and then. But right now, what we think is that we will borrow for North Donahue widening. That is built in. That would be late 2027, and so there's not any new debt service in this biennium, but there would be potentially in the next biennium. Potentially $20 million from the general fund to go with the $20 million that we talked about earlier for Richland Park coming from the 5 mil fund. That's in the CIP. And then also the Dean Road and Opelika Road intersection improvements, as well as any identified public safety facilities that we are thinking about out in 2029. Now, again, that's a long time away. Those things can change, but when you look at that financial overview that's on the last page of Megan's budget message, you can see that projection out to 2031?
2031.
And so that debt service is factored into those projections for now, although it could change. Some of our key indicators with debt, we like to keep very, very good industry standard is that debt service in your general fund should only be 10% or less of your total expenditures. Debt's something that's got to be paid no matter what, and so we don't want to have, too much of a fixed cost there that we don't have any control over. So that projection, the things that we have projected here stay well under that. They're at 8%, which provides a little more capacity should we determine at some point in the next few years that we might need to borrow again for that, or something else. So.
Where does school, when we support the school debt, Where does that fall?
It's in that 16 mil special revenue
Okay,
fund.
okay.
All paid funding sources.
And debt services?
Go in, everything's paid out of that
Okay.
fund.
Yeah, it's a
Doesn't
really
cross
good
over.
question. That's why I want to be very careful that this is just the general fund debt.
This is just the
And
general fund.
Always hard to get my head around it too, because there's a lot going on. And we recently did something for a debt issuance that has to do with schools and not
Right.
this. Yep.
Yep. This general fund. Couple of quick slides on enterprise funds. The sewer fund has been in really good shape for a while. The sewer fund has not had a whole lot of large capital projects over the past few years, and so we're consistently managing that ever since their last rate change. We continue to use that rate model to make sure that we feel like revenue is sufficient. As we move closer to CIP, big capital projects related to sewer, which you can see in the CIP that's in your packet, at some point, we will need to do an official update of that rate study and evaluate that and make sure that we're covering things. But nothing included in this budget, in this biennium related to rates at all. It is self-supporting. Sewer is 100% self-supporting. It does have debt, and the expectation is it will continue to fund its own debt, and it does that now, and will do that in the future. Our projected net position remains healthy through 2030, which you can see. The one thing you can see, though, is how the expense line, as we get a little further into this budget, it's getting a little closer to the revenue line. And that's a lot of the, we have new positions that Megan mentioned. We have increases in chemical costs. There are just some things that are changing on the operations side. As that operational gap kind of closes, that takes away our flexibility in funding, cash funding those capital projects. And so down the road, we may look at debt for the sewer fund to better manage that. But again, it's a little bit undecided at this point. The full projection that you'll be able to see when you get the full document just gives you an idea of what the expectation is for revenue over these years as well as expenses. And then we also have, this is operational, and then we have the capital and the debt repayment at the bottom because, again, those don't show up in expense for a proprietary fund because it's a different type of accounting. So we've included that at the bottom. Very good cash position to carry us through this biennium. We don't expect anything there at all. And then you're probably tired of talking about the solid waste management fund, but just as a recap, the budget is pretty much exactly what you saw in the projections for the rate increases. What you notice most about this chart is when that rate increase goes into effect, October 1st, we will see the line flip again back to having revenue and operating revenue and expense, with the revenue being higher. That's our capacity to fund that capital. It's all in that projection that you saw. We're in good shape. There are a couple little tweaks in the budget, some things that came up, with tip-in fees. All of that is in the budget. Still, everything looks great, and we kind of see that that cash flow that you saw at the last time as we get out into the end of that biennium, we're in a good financial cash position to fund. You'll remember that in 2030 of the cash projection during the rate review, there was a lot of capital, and we decided not to address that yet because it's too far out, and we would potentially re-look at rates again. But the fund will be in a good position to kind of move into that in 2029 as we review those rates again to make sure we're still in a good place. So things look good there. We've been noticing, if you've seen any of the notices, lots of things going out, letting people know that rate increase is coming. So hopefully everybody will be prepared for that. And there we go. Any questions about that?
And the only thing I've seen just through social media is that there's still, I don't think people quite understand backdoor service. And so, maybe we need to dive into that a little bit further on communication, but
It is, yeah. I
that's a
understand.
privilege, not that you're choosing that as an option.
It is, and while we're not here to, we appreciate the private sector, there are a lot of companies that will do that, and people can decide fiscally if it's a cheaper deal for them to have somebody come over and drag it to the curb or not. I saw some early things where some folks are confused. They're likely, as we saw when you were studying it, eligible for medical waiver, but they've got to go through the process and meet our documentation requirements. And Katrina's team is dealing with that every day and probably in high volume right now. We're also, through our utility billing efforts, and as people our utility billing office is wide open busy right now because of lease turnover. We're also warning people as they are coming in to switch over that there will be changes in October. Our team's done a great job of doing everything they can to let people know. So, any other questions on the revenue or debt for Allison?
Thank you, Allison.
I know that is much. A couple of quick questions for you. Just want to know on, if you look at the last of your little bound book about outside agencies, kind of, you've not had time to review this. That's totally understand that. Are you wanting a full printout like you got previously of every request and every piece of paper in those requests? Will gladly provide that to you. Just need to know consensus of the group. That's what you'd like to see. If you want to marinate on this and tell me a little more Wednesday about that, I'm fine with that.
And that was an
too.
explanation of what each organization
It was the exact packet that they submitted. Councilman Griswold has also just said, off and on in the last X amount of months as projects have come through, we have some tenants at Boykin. We also have some block grant funding that some folks get like $6,000 here and there out of block grant or whatever. Mr. Davis had, through that, had programmed for them, and some of you had an interest in just knowing, are there other funding sources that pass through the city, whether it's city dollars or not? We're happy to provide any of that. I didn't want to inundate you with information you did not feel you needed. You have enough papers for the budget, but I want to give you everything you would like to look at the same time. These are just things that we'd be working on in the background.
Based on prior conversations you and I had, there's a couple of organizations that have asked for increases, but it's not.
Yeah, but it's not unruly. So if you guys would like to marinate on that until Wednesday, we have time to put that together. That'd be fine. We have not scheduled a session to discuss it. We do not have the capital requests you dealt with early in this fiscal year, and we did not deal with during the budget process. We don't have those going on. These are just on the operating side.
Yeah.
And some are asking for less, so
Well,
it just depends.
Why don't the council think about it, and we'll talk about it on Wednesday, if that's all right.
Sure thing.
Sure.
And then Wednesday is going to be robust. Capital projects do take a long time. We are glad to go through everything. We're going to, each executive director has slides and information. And again, I have a lot of project managers in the room that manage our capital projects, and assistant directors and others. They're here to listen thoroughly. There's just a lot going on. And like I said, we're going to go over at the end of that projects. If you get to wondering why are things not in there, we do have a list. You've not seen this before, those of you that have been through our budget process many times. I'm trying to really be sure, I alluded to it earlier, that you understand that there are still a lot of things in motion. And so just because they didn't enter the 6-year capital improvement plan does not mean that they're not being worked on. They're not ready. And there's other aspects of unknowns. We do have to budget further out. Our rating agencies want to know what we plan to do, where our debt stands, but our revenue should continue to increase over time. We're very conservative on through the model, but it's hard to pick up absolutely everything. We also, our development partners, as things are developing and we are partnering with them, there's a lot of things like North Dean Road Extension from north of East University Drive to 280 are a great possibility. It is, we don't know enough yet, and we've been working with a developer or property owner for some time to budget for it. We could say, oh, we have a $2 million contribution every other year for the next 6 years. Well, we're shooting in the dark right now about what that looks like. We will need to participate in that road at some point in time if we want to, and I don't have enough information to tell you. So there's probably, Scott, do you know off the top of your head roughly how many projects are on there? Or Stephen, you remember? 25 or so. Yeah, it's a lot of projects. So I want to give you a signal because I think for you, you need to understand, well, are they working on that? What are they doing? So there's a lot more that we're looking at in the background, but some things just aren't ready. And then a couple of things I've been asked a little bit. We'll be talking about zoning ordinance things moving forward. We'll also be talking about a citywide traffic study. We'll also be talking, our interim city engineer, Brandy Ezel, will go over lightly where we are from the previous citywide traffic study. She's got a whole bunch of data on that. But if you guys want to take a deeper dive in traffic in general, I'm going to strongly recommend that we do a separate work session, whether that's in the budget or not, to just talk about that study, what we look at, what we don't. Don't mind talking about the dollars and cents right now at all. We have so much we could say about traffic and how we study it and what it means and what we're doing with timing of intersections and so on, and traffic flow being a priority of our citizens and you. That kind of deserves its own time period, and it may be more than one work session. And so it's just going to depend on what you guys want to know and when you want to know it. But Brandy will be touching on aspects of that. I've gotten questions from a few of you about that, where we are, based on questions you're receiving from constituents. And so we'll be happy to talk about
I
that
think
as
that'd be a
well.
great use of time, so we can.
Yeah,
pull
I think we
everybody.
can just talk about timing of that as you think about things and we get through the CIP. We can talk a little bit about when you might want to do that. But Brandy will touch on it and scratch the surface for you to give you an idea of the major things that are going on.
When are we scheduled to do another citywide traffic study? Is that?
We're gonna be
part of this
talking about
budget?
as part of this budget. It's coming
And
right up.
That's specific.
Right. I think one of the challenges is a citywide traffic study gives us base data. And there's a lot of other things with implementation that, I can go on and tell, and our retired city engineer wanted to do a lot of access management things that were proposed in the study. And one of those was to completely block a driveway to the Ogletree Village Shopping Center where Lucy's is from any straight across or left-in access. Completely block it with pouring concrete. And I don't know that the people in that area, the businesses, would have appreciated it. So while it's in the study, it doesn't mean we should have implemented it. And the city engineer was absolutely doing her job at the time we were resurfacing and came to me and said, the study says we should do this. And I said, the world is going to end if we do this in this area for these folks. And we need to talk about it the next time some things come around, because we have a lot of work to do with the businesses, the Morris Mill subdivision, and everybody else who's going to be impacted by that right in, right out. And so there are aspects of a traffic study that don't get implemented for other reasons. It doesn't mean it's not proposed in there, but it may not be a good idea at the then time, may not be feasible, or we may have changed our minds. So just as an example. But the city engineer, regardless of who's in the seat, will regularly bring those things forward internally. So.
Just a comment before you leave. I'm really proud of our sales tax figures, and as Megan alluded to, at a recent Big Ten meeting, I was the only person that had great news. And so I'm thankful we live in a town that's really doing well, and whether that's because of new businesses or events that have happened or success with our athletic teams, the fact is our sales tax is holding true. This thing with SSUT, I'm very in tune with, because it reminds me of what we used to deal with in my family's business, and the concerns of what was going to happen with people ordering online was a part of the fabric of my family making a decision to sell out when we sold our business. And it's here. I would just say to our community, you need to always know that in the best interest of this town and all the things that this municipal government funds, whether it's a project, a person, a service, to uphold that and make that as robust as possible is when you spend your money physically in this community. And I just hope all of you take that into consideration as you go to eat, go to shop, anything you might do. If you can do it in Auburn physically, that's what helps this government the very most. And so we'll continue to track SSUT into the future. We certainly want the information that tells us what's really going on with that. I don't expect anything to happen until a new governor is elected next year. And then there might be some movement going into 27, 28. But thank you for my editorial piece. I appreciate you allowing me that. Anything else?
Any other
All right, we'll
questions?
see everybody Wednesday.
See you Wednesday, same time, same
Yeah.
location. Thank you.
Thank you.